Amen. May the words that are heard be thine and not mine. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. From our Old Testament lection, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord: Come, go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel. The vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel as seemed good to him. The potter's hand. This passage reminds me of my Southern Baptist upbringing, and a frequently played hymn during the invitation time was "Have Thine Own Way." Anybody know what I'm talking about? That sound familiar? Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will, while I am waiting, yielded and still. Have thine own way. Wow, what a concept. God having complete control of us, our lives, and all of our direction. Really? The concept sounds palatable when referring to someone else or the inanimate clay, but for me, yikes. Do we actually believe in lordship to that degree? It requires trust and rapport and confidence in a higher, more capable source to surrender. What it requires is faith and commitment and trust. Trust. Our collect today suggests that the opposite of trust is not doubt or disbelief, as we often think. The opposite of trust is pride. The factor preventing lordship in our lives and thus hindering us from becoming what we could be is pride. This is especially true of us in our modern Western mindset. Unfortunately, it requires something catastrophic like a disease or a loss or Hurricane Dorian to force us to look upward rather than inward for help. In our vast wealth, it is simply too easy just to go it alone on all the really important stuff and only look to God for the matters where we don't have any real skin in the game. So why should we trust God? Why? Because God said so just doesn't seem to be enough. Jeremiah suggests that Israel might trust God due to God's master craftsmanship, and that God was going to smash them if they didn't. For today's purposes, we focus on God's expertise at molding us, forming us, creating us into beautiful pieces of art, every one of us. Did you catch that part about God using the same clay that was once spoiled and reworking it into a new and different product? Now that sounds something that we can believe in. Our psalm implies that God is trustworthy because God knows us more extensively, more intimately than we even know ourselves. God knows the original design. God has the blueprint. God knows the original intent. The Creator has known us longer, and none is wiser, fashioning us even before beyond our ability to fashion. That sounds believable. Philemon is an interesting and paradoxical epistle. A little backdrop explains Paul's plea to his fellow brother. Onesimus was formerly a slave of Paul's cohort and has either escaped his captivity and seeks asylum, or he wants to return to Philemon, his previous master, because he found the grace was not all that greener on the other side, but he fears ramifications for his actions. Or maybe just Paul wants Onesimus for himself. Whichever is the case, we should discuss this text further at another time due to its confusing and somewhat alarming position on slavery. However, today, again, our focus is on trust, and Paul conveys that God's interest in us is far beyond our social status, our position in life, the neighborhood where we live, or the bottom line in our checking accounts. Thanks be to God. Believing this is emancipating, to say the least. Finally, in Luke, Jesus admonishes us to count the cost and consider the expense of becoming a follower. Rich Webster is my mentor. I've mentioned him before. He has often reminded me that there is no such thing as a cost-free strategy. Lordship means that we lose everything so that we might discover all. We can trust Christ, for He has already considered the costs and paid the highest expense, all of it worth the realization of the end result in keeping with the bigger picture. Unbelievable. With all of these arguments understood, Jeremiah, the psalmist, Paul, and Jesus prove trust to be evident. We can trust God with the entirety of our lives, for it is God, the master craftsman, who seeks to shape us more and more into God's image until we find our rest with Thee. So, have Thine own way, Lord. Have Thine own way. Hold over my being absolute sway. Filled with Thy Spirit, till all can see Christ only always living in me. Amen.